Welcome back to Federal Insights, Repurposing Manpower Through Automation, sponsored by Iron Bow Technologies in partnership with Dell Technologies here on Federal News Network. My guest today is Jim Smid. He's the Chief Technology Officer for Iron Bow Technologies. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And before the break, we were talking about a VA case history where you brought in automation to help them with their video visits in the pandemic. You also mentioned some applications in the Defense Department, and maybe give us a rundown on some of the projects there that are illustrative of how you can apply AI, ML, and RPA.
Sure, absolutely. So thanks, Tom. It's a lot of times I think when people talk about the DoD and artificial intelligence, it's very easy to imagine, the Terminator, the robot fighting battles and doing wars. But that's really not what we're talking about in today's day and age. And most of the low-hanging fruit that we're talking about, in many ways, the DoD is no different than a lot of different businesses and missions and things we do. I've been in the federal side for a pretty long time. I used to work with a colonel, an Army colonel, and he said that the most difficult part of really any deployment was getting everybody and everything in the same place at the same time, and to make sure everything continued to work and function properly. And so you think about that, that's no different than, a lot of other companies and things we do. And if you can make that more efficient, then you can make everything about the DoD work better and be more efficient and free up manpower to do more important jobs and that kind of thing. You think about, there's a ton of applicability, whether that's supply chain management, whether it's areas where you're just trying to do predictive maintenance. Maintenance has been at the forefront of where a lot of industry has gone with analytics. I think back many years to when I was running operations, and the first time that I had somebody show up at my data center with a disk drive and say, "I'm here to replace your disk drive," and I said I didn't know that it failed, and they said it's going to, and they're going to replace it before that happened. Right? That was game changing, and to be able to do that with your helicopters, your tanks, your jeeps, anything that you need to do that to, that's all. That predictive maintenance is a critical piece. And it's, I think, where a lot of the resources are going to get applied now, because there's such a big impact for it. Certainly there are other applications. You think about, drone activity, you think about drones being able to patrol a particular area and to look for anomalies. I mean, really, when you're doing machine learning, you're looking for anomalies. You're learning over time what things look like, what terrain looks like, what's expected movement, what's expected to be in the area. So that's a great example where you certainly will see, I think, some of that more as it's applicable to defense. You'll see artificial intelligence, machine learning, and RPA. All of those, again, that's your arsenal of tools, depending on what kind of problems you're trying to solve.
Yeah, I think I remember once recently it came up that in satellite imagery, one of the grand challenges is getting a imaging system to recognize a circle on the ground.
Sure.
Sounds easy, but to do it in a machine setting is quite a problem. So that's the kind of thing I think you mean.
Right, absolutely. I mean, just getting a computer to recognize, circles or letters or symbols, then you start getting into facial recognition or anything like that. There's a lot of processing and raw data that goes into that. So it's very complex.
And how do some of these emerging technologies, we hear about 5G a lot, and I guess 5G is coming on. Right now, it's mostly in a kind of a mundane usage because it's not all that fast yet, but it's going to get there. And that ties in with the Internet of Things and the sensor. What do you see as the futures there with respect to AI and ML?
Yeah, it's really, what does the realm of the possible look like? And 5G is, it is a game changer that as that gets rolled out and the speeds get better, there's some issues with 5G in terms of how close the towers need to be together. You're not going to see the speeds and everything at the snap of a finger, but that's coming. We know what it's capable of doing, and whether that's getting fast bandwidth out to remote rural areas. So for our telehealth business, that will be really critical for us. It means we can do different kinds of care for a rural person. You might even see things in the future where you could do remote surgeries or things like that if you have low latency and you have the kind of dependable network access and things that some of that promises to bring in the future. So there's a lot of that realm of the possible where everybody's kind of salivating on what can we do with all of this. And it is absolutely this convergence of technologies. It's not just one, it's not just 5G. It's also how fast the IoT devices are getting, how capable those devices are getting, how much data you can have. It's this reinvestment in the edge. It's funny. Dell World is happening today as well, and I spent some time on Dell World's things earlier this morning. And you heard a lot of that talk about the shift from where processing's done, and I think it was 2025. They're looking at 75% of all processing will happen out at the edge. Well, that's a huge shift from where it happens today. So those investments and those changes and that convergence of technology, 5G will make it faster. All the different compute and um, peripherals and things that are becoming available. It's a really exciting time to be able to look at what you can do, not only with our traditional IT infrastructure, but what you can do with analytics and automation to make everything work better.
It may be that the AI itself will be applied to the different channels of transmission through the communication system, the most optimal way to take over, from the 5G itself. You would have AI pick your best pathway, for example.
That's a great point, and it's something that I usually end up talking with people about when we talk about AI, because you can talk about, let's buy AI, and there's software and things that are capable of doing the analytics and you can apply. But a lot of times when we're buying AI or we're thinking about AI, it's being embedded in other things. It's about having, this is certainly important for the DoD, they want a smart network. And a smart network, again, it's a convergence of technologies. You can't have a smart network if you don't have a software defined network, if you don't have the agility built in to manually do things. Well, then I can start doing some automation and I can make that happen, over just at a push a button. Well, now I get some artificial intelligence built in and I actually understand what's happening at an application layer, or what my predictive trending looks like for where bandwidth is needed. All of those things working in conjunction with each other means you can build intelligent networks that are capable of doing much more and way more efficiently. You don't have to over provision. You can always on the fly reprovision, reallocate assets where it makes sense and prioritize workloads so that it's being spent in the right places.
And the other element, besides having a good use case that you can turn into a real requirement for an AI or ML project, of course, is the data. And that's where maybe the chief data officer or the data officer for your unit or group or bureau can come into the picture at this point and discuss some of the data issues, because data is expensive to move around. It can be. And you don't want to oversaturate your project with data, because there's a point of diminishing returns but rising costs, and yet you want to make sure that your algorithms are trained properly. So what are some of the approaches to handling data there?
Sure, some of it I alluded to already, and you're right. Having a data officer is you got a central point where you can work on these data issues that are just prevalent throughout your entire ecosystem. I alluded to some of it earlier. Some of it's going to be at the edge. That reason for pushing compute out to the edge is because, as you said, moving data can be expensive. Well, I don't want to move all the data all the time. I want to move the data that's important, or maybe I just want to move what is my outcomes to a centralized location, right? I don't need everything there. So managing that data and making sure you're crunching it in the right places and you're moving relevant data around is really important. This whole idea of, data lakes and things like that, those are not necessarily new ideas, but they're certainly taking new life on. And it's because of how much data is becoming available. And how do you get all of it together, and how do you get it to correlate? One of the problems with big data in general has always been normalizing that data. How do I get data from varied sources all in one place and kind of looking the same, and so I can manage it and do things with it? So that data officer is a critical piece. They're kind of this overseer of what's going to happen, what are good ideas for where the investments are going, and how you're going to handle data movement, where things get processed, what gets translated back and forth, and who needs that data.
And a question I've had too is, based on hearing tales of people that finally acquire a data set that they use to train their algorithms, and they might use it over and over.
Sure.
When is that the right approach, or when do you need to update your data set for training based on changing conditions, new requirements? Because you don't want to use a 10-year-old data set necessarily for a brand new project or a brand new algorithm.
Yeah, I think that data sets maybe do age. That there's things you can learn from an old data set, but I think the challenge is in always recognizing these new problems. And if you continue to use the same data set, you're going to solve the same problems over and over again. And it's important to be challenging, even from a training perspective, challenge yourself on, let's figure out a way to solve a different problem. There's pieces of it that are certainly applicable across the data sets, but there's pieces of it that you have to have some ingenuity. And I think that you only get that when you're starting to look at it from different things you're trying to solve, many times very different problems you're trying to solve and solutions.
Yeah, nothing's set and forget, I guess, in the IT
Right.
world. And in the time we have remaining, maybe just review what are the best practices for getting started and for project success in this whole new area of AI, ML, and RPA.
Sure. I'd hit with the low hanging fruit. I would start relatively simple. Again, a lot of the mundane things are the things that you can get a lot of bang for your buck out of. And the way this naturally works is that they can be built upon. They can become part of a bigger puzzle in the future where you don't have to solve everything at once. And then, rely on experts, people that have been there and done it before. It's such a varied field, and there's so many different components and complexities that come into it. So working with somebody like Ironbow, Dell, Intel, working with the community that is trying to support, how do we get these missions done, how do we drive these outcomes, that's really, I think, what's critical in moving forward.
And probably also not being unwilling to ask colleagues in different domains, because regardless of whether you're in whatever domain the government does, and that's pretty much everything, everybody has similar processes and business practices that underlie it all. So you might be able to get something from DoD that applies in NIH or NIH in VA or whatever the case might be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's a great thing to keep in mind. And certainly, for the DoD, who has some very unique problems, they have a lot of problems that are being solved in other industries as well. And so while everybody has some unique data sets and some unique problems, you're right. There's some things that are constant across all, and there's just some unique approaches that maybe it's not the same problem, but you can learn a lot from the approach that people have taken and the ingenuity that has gone into solving some of these problems and how they're using the data, and or just how they're combining the data, or just, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah, so almost a marketplace could develop perhaps for
Sure,
solutions that.
absolutely, yeah. And I think you see, some of the industry, and we try to do lunch and learns where it's more collaborative, right? It is about trying to make sure we're not all reinventing the wheel, I guess.
All right. I want to thank today's guest. Jim Smid is the Chief Technology Officer for Iron Bow Technologies. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. You've been listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Iron Bow.